obviously, no matter who you elect, you never get what you want somehow, but like, you still have power, I guess, somehow. I don't know how.
Hello, it's April 2025. This video is inspired by two different conversations that I had with two different people in two different comment sections on two different posts. And each person is the author of these posts. Now, before I get into this video, any names that I may have mentioned or loosely imply or refer to, I do so with no ill intent or malice. This video is a warning to the people. Why I'm addressing this Freeman on the Land and Freeman on the Land 2.0 nonsense is simply because I'm trying to help people from making the same mistakes that have been made historically, which found people in a lot of serious trouble. And I mentioned before in other videos, we see the resurrection of this Freeman on the Land nonsense. And I call this Freeman on the Land 2.0. And these people that I refer to historically and today say what people want to hear. Give them false hope, saying, here's the problem, here's the solution. And as throughout history, we're going to see the same things unfolding today. And this is the objective of this video as a warning. This is why I'm addressing this. Not to have any ill intent or malice towards any individuals who claim to be today's gurus on this topic, so people don't fall into that trap. Now, with that said, and especially in today's world where there's so many people reacting and living in fear, reacting emotionally, perhaps even anger with how the world is. And there's a lot of desperate people, and there's a lot of people for some reason, as a descriptive, have lost hope. And it's these false prophet types. And I've given the definition of prophet, which doesn't necessarily have to do with religion or belief systems. A leader, false prophets, give these people, or at least it appears to give these people, what they want. And more people are not only talking about this, but sharing their content. Let me go back to, say, the mid-2000s to the late 2000s, around 2010. I had come across the topic of Freeman on the Land, and it was a hot topic. And because of my efforts at that time, people would invite me into these forums. Now, before social media groups had their own little groups and were really big, you just went on the internet and went into forums. So I joined these forums, and for the longest time I would just listen, like read what's going on, where are these people, what are they about? And then I started to ask questions. And like today, asking questions is a bad thing because it triggers people. And some of the questions I would ask about this Freeman on the Land stuff, for example, they want to do this or that, I would ask them, how are you going to enforce that? How are you going to enforce whatever it is that you want? And that really triggered them back then. Now, back then there was a man by the name of Rob Menard, and he was one of the gurus. And I had coined the term guru with these people And he wasn't the only one, but he was a really big name, especially here in Canada. And apparently the news caught on to that and started calling them gurus. And when you confront these people with questions, simple questions, logic, they get very upset. They can't answer them. And that is a sign of a red flag. And eventually in these forums, I would be, like today, booted out, blocked. But I noticed one thing over time. I would tell people, whatever their efforts were, how to play out, not in their favor, and cause them a lot of harm. And back then, there were a lot of false claims of success with this and that. And in time, the truth would come out. Sometimes I'd have to press for it, but the truth would come out. And there's claims of, for example, arresting the judge and all this other stuff. Meanwhile, they're getting taken away by the police. Never follow-ups to all this, but if you dig, which is what I did at the time, you find out that it didn't end well for them. And back then, people were going to the extreme of, for example, handing in their driver's licenses back to the government, their social security, their social insurance numbers, their birth certificates, everything. They were just returning everything, saying, wiping their hands of everything. They want nothing to do with it. Some people even put their own license plates made out of cardboard, wrapped in saran wrap, on their vehicle. And it didn't end well for them. There was times where they would videotape and claim success, but they ended up getting charged and other charges compounded, and it really didn't go well for them. Some people didn't even want to pay, for example, their mortgages. That didn't end well for them either. We see the same type of thing kind of going on today. People recording, an officer pulls them over for whatever reason. I just want to stop here for a second. I'm not stating or implying that sometimes these stops are unlawful or anything, or there's some misconduct by an officer and everything, but I just want to make that clear. That does happen. But overall, someone gets pulled over and they basically harass the officer. Now, there are times in some of these videos where the officer doesn't have good intentions, and yes, there is the perception of success with that. But more times than not, it ends up costing the person a lot of trouble. And sometimes these people think that the officer is harassing them, and they're not. Well, that's a different tangent. So back then, say the mid-2000s to late 2000s, people were doing this kind of thing all the time. I was in these forums, talking with people, getting booted out. And then people back then started taking note that things that I was saying would happened, and they want to know more. Now, over the years since then, I've run into people who are like Freeman on the Land types, and we cross paths, we talk, and some of them, being intelligent, listen, and they end up concluding, yes, this is all nonsense. And there's all these claims, I remember around 2010, how these people were successful in arresting the judge and charging prosecutors and police and using pseudo law. All these claims, but in time it would turn out that, yeah, these were false claims. And when I would ask questions, it really ticked people off. And I remember at the time, I would challenge these gurus on their pseudo law knowledge and how they're going to apply this and that and everything else. They didn't like it, and usually ends up silence. But people who were following them would say, hey, tell us more. Me, asking me, tell us more. Because I would tell them how things would play out, and it did. They would find themselves in a lot of trouble. Now, this Rob Menard guy, apparently before he stopped doing what he was doing, his content is still online from 15, 20 years ago, but anyway, he got himself in a lot of trouble, and he did an interview or several interviews with the media, basically backpedaling on everything he was saying and admitting that, yeah, it's all wrong. Now, a lot of people got themselves in a lot of trouble. And I stated, this seems to kind of happen every 10, 15 years. In around 2010, it wasn't the first time. This goes back. The problem is, people start looking back at those histories and saying, well, yeah, oh, it didn't work. Well, just modify a little bit. Well, work this time. They didn't do it right, whatever. And they're running through their heads. And over time, people who had spent decades learning all this stuff, we would cross paths, and I would challenge them. Some of them, being intelligent, listened, and they realized, yeah, this is ridiculous. But now we see this really picking up pace again. Where a lot of this really starts is we have people like, for example, Rob Menard, who self-taught law and politics or whatever he researched. And a lot of that research is based on people trying this in the past. And there seems to be a pattern of every 10 to 15 years this thing gets resurrected, and I'd say 10 years, and people go with it. There's a pattern there. So in the mid-2000s, there was nothing new. You can go back into the 90s, the 80s, the 70s, the 60s, so forth. People were trying to do the same thing. I'm going to segue for a moment. I understand people's frustration. I understand people's fear of the world and everything that's going on. But it doesn't mean that you can rely on, for example, pseudo-law. A lot of these people who self-taught and everything else, they will go back and find laws that, as a descriptive, are extinct. They fail to accept that laws are not static. They evolve. Whether it's good or bad, I'm not saying either way. I'm just saying law is not static. It evolves. And some of the arguments that they want to rely on and everything else is purely nonsensical. Now, I gotta say something here. There are very minute tidbits of truth in what these people are saying, but the rest of it is what the problem is. Now, bringing it to today, this right now type of thing, we see this thing being resurrected to what I call Freeman on the Land 2.0 nonsense. And there's two modern gurus who seem to be really pushing this nonsense. Now, I mentioned in a previous video, in one of the videos in the series of PsyOps, about this documentary, what was it called? Canada's an Illusion or something like that. And I just say it's all nonsense. It's Freeman on the Land 2.0. So, jumping ahead now a little bit, this recent conversation through comment section on these two posts by these two different people. One person, the first person was named Harry, I believe, maybe John, I can't remember off the top of my head. And they made a post, and I had commented. And he was promoting, he posted some sort of alleged documentary on Canada's an Illusion, and it goes on about land. And I mentioned this in a previous video too. He was kind of promoting it, and I just basically said this is nonsense, everything else. And I try to have some dialogue. But the problem is, when you confront these people with direct questions, they get triggered because they cannot answer them. So they end up accusing you of being, or in this case me, being a government agent and a shill and controlled opposition and everything else without even knowing who I am. Now, keep this in mind. I had qualified myself, and then I gave some points. And again, it's just insults. That's all these people have when you confront them with very simple questions. And could I have chose my words better, saying, you know, this is clueless? Perhaps, but what we find here is if something like that, which wasn't intended to be an insult, makes people, as a very loose descriptive, blind with rage, then that means these people are not in control of their thoughts, their emotions, and everything else. Can they be trusted? You decide. So this dialogue kind of went back and forth. I started asking questions. Never got an answer to any of the points I made. Only accusations that I was a shill, government, psyop, whatever, controlled opposition, but never address any of my points. So this, you know, this is, as I said, this is not the first time I've been dealing with this kind of stuff with these type of people. Then comes this lady, Jane, who created some sort of declaration, petition, wanted 200 people to sign. Last I looked, it was 108 of some declaration. This is nothing new. This has been tried in the mid-2000s. This has been tried in the decades prior. And nothing ever becomes of it other than people falling for it, drinking that Kool-Aid, and getting themselves into a lot of trouble. And it's just Freeman on the Land nonsense 2.0. That's all it is. So I commented. And again, it was a very short comment, but I said this is, you know, basically clueless, and they went off the deep end, as they usually do. So came the accusations and everything else. So I addressed the accusations. I might have still qualified myself, my knowledge base, everything else, and asked questions. Explain some things and ask questions. No reply to any of the points that I had made. None. Only attacks. This person was so enraged that I would challenge them that it was very clear afterwards they never read a word that I said. They wanted to be heard. And everything that they were accusing me of, for example, gaslighting, calling names, and everything, is what they were doing, she was doing. And one example that comes to mind was she starts off a reply to my reply to her by stating that she is not a sir, and she wanted to make that very clear. I never addressed her as a sir, and I stated that in my reply afterwards. I have no idea where that nonsense came from, but it really shows an unstable mind. Can anyone trust an unstable mind? I'll leave it at that. And these are the types of people that are now pushing this Freeman on the Land 2.0. They have no idea what they're talking about, just like around 2010. They may have some little bit of experience in law or something, but when you further look into this person, they described they supported the convoy, protest of rubber, whatever you want to call it, and apparently wrote something to do, I can't even remember, wrote something and submitted it to the RCMP, which doesn't mean anything. They just drafted something up, a form. Doesn't mean it's being used or anything else. And this is not a bash against either of these two people. I'm simply highlighting the two new gurus that I've come across on this Freeman on the Land 2.0 stuff. And people are sharing their content, unfortunately. And I had one person shared that video, Canada's an Illusion, or the so-called documentary, and I had mentioned to them, this is all nonsense type of stuff. And, well, that didn't go very well, but I don't want to go down that path there. So people have to be very mindful, and this is my point. This Freeman on the Land 2.0, if people start following and listening to these so-called gurus, they're going to end up finding themselves in a lot of trouble with the law. If these people cannot defend their position with some simple answers, or some simple questions and give simple answers, that right there is a red flag. Red flag right away. And now, I guess about 4 weeks ago now, somebody that I know was talking to one of these people in real time, and they were saying, what questions can I ask? So I said, oh, you can ask, I was typing out, you can ask this question, that question. And they pretty much had the same type of results as if it was me asking that. Because these people don't like to be challenged because they cannot support anything that they're saying. They sound smart, they sound like they know what they're talking about, and that's not just these two people or Rob Menard or any other. There's a whole bunch of these people who have spent decades committed to nonsense. Now, this woman, apparently, according to her own writing, has been an activist since the 1960s, and that right there has to tell you something. And they were involved in protests and marches and whatever else they've been involved with since the 60s, and right there, and even supported the convoy and everything else. This woman is the poster child for the very things that are the opposite of what I tell people. And I discussed how, for example, protests, like she has been involved in since the 60s, are allowed to pacify people and conduct psyops on people. She never caught on to that. And even watching some of her videos and things that she says, one of the things I said in the comment even was that she has no clue on how the world actually works. Now, talking with people that know her and follow her, apparently she's the type of person that has never liked to be challenged. Her word's final. This is from people that know her personally. And I even had a couple of people question with her age now that if she has all her faculties together, I don't know. But anyway, so she's been doing all this kind of stuff, and she self-taught law and eventually got grandfathered into the paralegal profession. I want to stop here for a moment, and I'm going to be very clear before I get into this. I'm not stating or implying that what I'm about to say applies to her or not. I don't know. However, I remember during that time when people were being grandfathered in, there was a big problem with the courts and even clients complaining that they're not getting good representation. A huge problem. Because just because someone has been involved in the courts doesn't mean that they know what they're doing, especially if they're self-taught. No formal education. The only formal education that she has is she has a bachelor's degree in the liberal arts theoretical pseudoscience of psychology, which doesn't mean anything. It's a degree in nonsense. I've discussed this plenty over the years. But it kind of makes sense when she and this other guy accused me of the very things that they were doing to me. Gaslighting, name calling, the list goes on. And I was trying to highlight, like, this is what you guys are doing. And at one point she had commented, well, this is your textbook gaslighting or something. I'm thinking, where the hell are you coming up with this? It doesn't even make sense. But when you press these gurus, they cannot give answer. That's a red flag. And people are sharing their content. And I actually had a conversation very recently when somebody had shared one of their content, and I said, hey, you know, this is nonsense. I've addressed this actually. It was actually the Canada's an Illusion alleged documentary. It's all nonsense, and well, that conversation didn't go very well. I'll just leave it at that. But these people are simply doing what has been done before, and before that, and before that. And nothing has changed, and these people can't see it. And it was actually at one point I was talking to someone that knows this woman, and I started to wonder if these people were, as they were calling me, government agents or shills or whatever they were calling me, because it just seemed really bizarre how everything transpired. I don't know. I'm not sitting here implying they are or they are not, but that was my thought during this conversation. But here, again, I'm going to reiterate the point of this video is people need to be very much aware of what the Freeman on the Land movement is all about and how it's being resurrected now. It's being tweaked and rebranded, and we're seeing the conception of it being sold to the public. And unfortunately, there can be many people who are going to buy into it and be disappointed. Now with these two conversations in the comment section of these two posts, I ended up deleting my initial comment for each because I just got tired of getting notifications from those posts, and I just deleted that because I thought, okay, and it's not even worth it. And I did say to these people, you have an opportunity to learn something. She claims she has 28 years of some sort of law. Well, based on what I've seen and how she conducts herself, it's pretty scary. And being an activist since the 60s doesn't mean anything. Anyway, it's going to highlight one more time. People have to be very much aware of another psyop with this Freeman on the Land 2.0 starting to emerge. Don't buy into it. I've told people how the world works, and all you can do is survive without compromising yourself. You're not changing anything. There's people with generational commitment and who have the monopoly on violence. That's the reality. Real hope, hope being the impossibility of reason, is knowing the truth and accepting the facts. This is a warning to people who are not familiar with the Freeman on the Land movement. Look into that before you start buying into whatever is being done today. And it's not a rabbit hole that, oh, there must be some truth to it. As I said, there's some tidbits of facts, but the problem is you go down that rabbit hole and you're just introducing useless information in the mind, confusing people. And that's the key. One key to a psyop is confuse people, so people don't know what's going on. It's just a warning. Watch out for these people, and if you ask me, don't give them any attention. That's all I really have to say. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share. Hello, it's... yeah, I don't even know. Is it?
Listen to this and write it down if you can't remember it. You're never going to outgrow warfare. You simply must learn to fight. I hear people saying to me, oh, when is it going to get easier? When you die.